So today's lecture is about American literature, and specifically we are going to go through a very brief history of this literature. Of course, anyone who'd like to read more about the topics that you are going to go through, you can go to the references about the history of American literature, because we all know it's very rich uh, and detailed history, but this is just to have a brief idea how to start and what are the most important features or landmarks in this literature. Okay, so we are going, of course, to start from the early beginnings, and here we see Native American oral literature. We all know that as a country, the people who live in America, they are actually immigrants who came from Europe, from other parts of the world, and the history of America as a country is not actually a very long history or ancient one. So we are talking about people who originally lived in America, Native Americans, and we are talking later on about the cultures that came to America, and they somehow created a new kind of society. But before these European cultures, we have Native Americans, those people who originally lived in America. Their literature was mainly oral. They didn't have any written literature. Unlike European cultures, Native Americans did not use a written alphabet. There's no known alphabet that they used and written their literature with. Their tradition was mainly oral, and this is actually may create kind of difficulty in knowing exactly what was this literature, because it was later that someone decided to write down this oral literature. So anything of this oral tradition that came to us because we found that someone has actually decided to write it down at some point. So they only relied on what spoken words, chanted, sung, or presented in lengthy narratives. Mainly, they were kind of having this quality of songs, chants, songs, and basically, I guess they were rituals related to certain events or things that happen in the culture itself, in their small society. Some historians have chosen to call these oral expressions as oratures. Orature. They were songs, rituals, and chants mostly related to nature. Of course, because they are living in surroundings that were mainly in nature. This interaction that happens in nature, for example, they would believe that nature has certain influence on the birth, death, life events that happens to them. So the reaction towards this influence of nature was by, for example, giving a song or a ritual, so that, for example, their children are saved. So that, for example, if someone goes to hunting, they will be given the good luck they need in order to get good hunting. All these kinds of interactions between humans and nature produced this kind of literature, which is oral and basically is chanted or sung. So Native American creation stories were never written down or gathered until the middle to late 19th century, when Euro-Americans developed the linguistic skills and cultural understanding to translate and transcribe them. So mainly the Native Americans, and I think this is something related to the human nature whatsoever, that human nature always tend to find origin for things. There should be some starting point. Where does, for example, this whole creation started from? What are we are already familiar with the stories of creation in our religions, whether we are talking about Christianity or Islam, or we are familiar with these stories. But it seems that not only these kind of monotheistic religions, but also other native religions also have their own versions of the stories of creation. And here actually there is this example from a text. Okay, the Navajo story of creation. Navajos are actually, this is one of the tribes, of Native Americans, one of the known tribes. What does it say? Actually, I'm not sure how this word is spelled, pronounced, but it means the emergence. When it was later translated, it is translated as the emergence. What does it say? It happened a long ago, they say. In the beginning, there was only darkness, with sky above and water below. Then, by some mysterious and holy means, sky and water came together. When they touched, that's when everything began. So, this is how they explain the beginning of creation. That was the first world, which was like an island floating in a sea of mist. It's really interesting, actually. They have founded some kind of account of how the whole world started. So this is just an example. Let's see here what is the next period. After the European campaigns came to the American continent, now we have what we call exploration period, which spans from 1492 to 1607. The writings in this period, of course, according to the name given to this period, exploration. So we guess that the writings are going to be about the new things, the new explorations that the let's say the Europeans have made as they were encountering this new place. So the literature is composed of European writings that describe the explorers' travels. So mainly we can call it a travel literature, أدب الرحلات, and impressions of the continent and its native people. Somewhere that's totally new, people are strange and having a very different culture from the European culture. Actually, it wasn't just one culture. Of course, we are talking about varieties of cultures of the Native Americans. So mainly the writings in this period were about the encounters of these people. The literature of this period comes to us in the form of letters and journals written by explorers as well as Native American tribal leaders. Actually, not only the people who were explorers, the Europeans, wrote about their encounters, even the Native Americans were also amazed or astonished at the appearance of these people. Also, they were astonished by their culture. So the encounters gave us writings from both sides, from the explorers and from the tribal leaders of the Native American cultures. And of course, why is it in the form of letters and journals? Because mainly some of the explorers would write letters to send them off seas to their, for example, to their original countries. Others were keeping journals, daily journals, writing about their experiences. So here there is also an example from a description of New England, and it was called New England, by John Smith, and he's actually one of the famous explorers of America. Who can desire more content that hath small means? If he have any grain of faith or zeal in religion, what can he do less hurtful to any, or more agreeable to God, than to seek to convert those poor savages to know Christ in humanity? Actually, one of the things that the Europeans believed that it was their task to do is to convert these people to Christianity. They were actually, there were missionaries that wanted to, or they saw that, or they believed, we can say, that it is their duty to make these people convert to Christianity and to introduce them to this religion. Okay, and this is part actually of a text which is called Description of New England. Let us see here what we have next. Next we have what we call the Colonial Period, spanning from 1607 to 1765, and from the title we can understand that now it is colonies that are each one is situated in a certain part of the continent. Okay, the colonial period was dominated by Puritan beliefs, and thus literature of this period is usually historical, religious, or didactic. The Puritans who used to have their place in England, for example, you see, because of especially after the accession of Charles II, because when he came back from his banishment in France, and he brought with him the French culture influence, and he reopened theaters, and literature actually somehow flourished. And this was against what the Puritans have done before. Actually, the Puritans disliked, let's say, the influence of art and literature on society, and they were very strict actually. So they left England to America, where they found actually a new place where they can freely apply their own principles, their Puritan and strict way of thinking. It is a new place, and they can freely apply it on people or force people to follow it. So the society in general, and let's say the kind of writings that were reflected from this period usually have this kind of quality. They were historical, religious, or didactic. Imaginative literature was rare. In some colonies, it was banned from being immoral, sorry. It was considered immoral. The same things that actually they used to do when they were in England, in Europe. So they brought this influence with them. The literature of this period comes to us in forms of tracts, polemics, journals, narratives, sermons, because we are talking about religious writings, and some poetry. Okay, there was this belief that actually we should still retain this kind of restrictions on society that are more related to Puritan beliefs. Okay, now next we have Revolutionary Period, spanning from 1765 to 1790. It is on this time that the colonies, they found that we should make a revolution and get independence, which means that now America is starting to emerge as an independent country, not governed by the countries who came originally. I mean, I'm talking here about the countries. Each one has its own colony, European countries that came to America, and we all know that England was the dominant one. So the Revolutionary Period usually refers to writings that are politically motivated, of course, because this period was really crucial in determining the status of America. Now America wants to emerge as an independent country that has its own state, its own government, rules, laws. Okay, so the writings were mainly motivational, political. Okay, either in support of British rule, some wanted the British rule to stay, in support or in support of American patriotism and independence, or relating to the Constitution. Okay, so actually the writings of this period reflect the situation in that time. And here the writing at this time is dominated by political documents, speeches, and letters, and one of the most famous one is the Declaration of the independence of the United States of America. It's actually one of the most influential and beautiful documents from this period. Declaration of the Independence of the United States of America. Okay. After this period comes the Romantic period, and I think this is natural because revolutions are mainly influenced by this kind of romantic way of thinking. See, romantics usually are revolutionary. So I think it comes naturally that after this period comes Romantic period, okay, which is the American Renaissance. Sometimes it's called American Renaissance, spanning from 1828 to 1865. This period was the first major explosion of a distinctly American body of literature. Finally, now we have literature which is purely literature, not influenced by politics, not influenced by religion, not influenced by any kind of external, let's say, impact that comes because of certain situation in society. Now we have literature that is mainly inspired by nature, inspired by imagination. Okay, many of American literature's most well-known writers emerged during this time. Actually, one of the let's say the most famous and most well-read and quoted American poets come actually from this period, and some of them actually influenced American literature for the ages to come. Their influence continued till even the modern times, till our time, even in the contemporary literature. Romanticism was a literary and artistic movement of the 19th century that arose in reaction against 18th century new classicism. So stop going back to the classical period and bringing forms and themes and ideas from them. Why not produce literature which basically is coming out from the individual's own feelings and imaginations and the individual's own personal experience? Okay, this is actually very revolutionary, and it's very similar to the British and the English romanticism. So they placed a premium on fancy, imagination, emotion, nature, individuality, and exotica, anything which is strange, exotic, gothic, supernatural, something related to the interaction between man and nature. These are the features that were very characteristic of this period. And here we have an example from Ralph Waldo Emerson, Nature. The title itself can tell you what is it about. To go into solitude, a man needs to retire as much from his chamber as from society. I am not solitary whilst I read and write, though nobody is with me. So, but if a man would be alone, let him look at the stars. Look at this here. It's some kind like a call or invitation to go back to nature, to seek refuge in nature, in the beauty of nature. Because if you are in nature, you cannot feel alone. This is what he's saying. The rays that come from those heavenly worlds will separate between him and what he touches. If the stars should appear one night in 1,000 years, how would men believe and adore and preserve for many generations the remembrance of the city of God, which had been shown? But every night come out these envoys of beauty and light, the universe with their admonishing smile. You see this kind of interaction between man and nature, and also this individual experience that the poet is talking about, because this experience is felt only by him. But through describing it, he's trying to invite people also to interact with nature the same way. And each one now could have their own personal experience and speak about it. Okay? So this is what characterized the Romantic literature of America. And of course, as a reaction to, we can call somehow extreme romanticism, extreme escape from reality, from life, comes a reaction which is what? Realism. It seems like all the time there's a literary movement which has certain features. Because they go to extremes, the next literary movement that comes after it comes as a reaction against it. So it's natural to see that after Romanticism comes Realism, 1865 to 1900. The post-Civil War period, and usually it comes after wars, you see, because war is one of the experiences that brings people to reality and forces them to look realistically at things, because it's very real experience that shakes people's belief in the ability of the individual to retain their own humanity and to treat people or other people with the same feeling of brotherhood or humanity. Because the violence that happens in war, the killing that happens in war, shake the faith that people have in humanity at all. Okay? So they see that relying on individuality is useless. It brings killing and violence and wars. So we should keep ourselves realistic as much as possible and deal with life realistically. That's how it becomes a reaction. The post-Civil War period was an era of increased industrialization and urbanization, and we cannot also forget the beginning signs, the signs that started to appear of development and progress because of the progress that happened in science, which created for us new inventions, and these new inventions industrialized society. Okay, so as the nation attempted to recover emotionally, culturally, and politically from the aftermath of the war, now it seems that life is or should be dealt with more realistically than with imagination and personal feelings. Though there were still elements of romanticism, this period was considered realistic in its emphasis on unidealized and truthful depictions. Let's show society as it is. Let's speak about real problems, especially when we are talking about society that is gradually becoming industrial, gradually becoming materialistic, which means what? It means we have new problems emerging, and we should address these problems and speak about them. We cannot escape from them like the romantics do. So in this case, it is more suitable for literature to become truthful and realistic. Rather than the remote or strange, realists wrote about the ordinary, not strange or things that couldn't be understood. The probable, things that could happen, about characters who seemed like real people in situations that real people routinely experience. Speak about people in their daily lives. When you are writing, for example, a novel or fiction, let the characters be from real life. People, when they read this book or this novel, they can associate or relate with this character. Who are they? Maybe they are similar to them, living in the same conditions, having same problems. People would like to read such things. Okay, this is what realism was all about. After the 900s, and of course when we speak about 900s and onwards, we are speaking about modernism, whether in American literature or the English literature. Modern period, and we all know that beside industrialization that continued in the modern period, also we have the influence of the wars, the world wars in this period, the first and the second. So works in this period reflect the changing social, political, and cultural climate and are diverse, experimental, and non-traditional, an age of disillusionment and confusion, because the great wars, the first and the second world war, have created this kind of confusion in society and disbelief in the human values, especially after the atrocities that people witnessed. Now psychological problems, alongside of course the other kind of problems, social problems, political, economical problems, now we have psychological problems that also emerged. So this requires new ways of expression. The traditional ones cannot fit anymore. So some poets, uh, on purpose, tried to experiment with new forms. Others wanted to create free verse poetry, or literature. Uh, the literature of the modern period sometimes lacks form. You cannot understand what is the form that the writer is following here. And this actually is a reflection of the confusion of the age itself, because the age itself seems to be formless. There are no, let's say, points of reference that people could go to like before. Before, for example, people would seek religion. Other times they would seek certain humanistic beliefs. Other times they would think of politics, human values. Now all these things proved to be false. After the war, people disbelieved in all these things. So now human beings are pointless, or they don't have this point of center or focus or reference to which they can base their own values and beliefs. And this was reflected in the literature of this period. Okay? The moral shock after the world wars caused a huge break from the traditional cultural values. It's very strange now. How can we find meaning? We need to find meaning now. So the literature was, say, of this period was about the search of meaning. Some modern movements that appeared were, for example, Imagism. It's American, from 1912 to 1927, led by Ezra Pound and Amy Lowell. The Imagist poets rejected 19th century forms and language. Instead, they wrote short poems that used ordinary language and free verse. Okay, they found that it is more suitable to use a free verse, and also to speak ordinary, easy to understand language from daily life. Okay, and they were very short poems and filled only with images. That's why they are called Imagists. They were very direct. Other forms of literary movements, like the Lost Generation, after the and actually the title says it all. After the First World War, a group of American writers grew increasingly disillusioned by and resistant to what they saw as hypocrisy in dominant American ideology and culture. Many of these writers left America in search of a more artistic life in London or Paris. And I think one of the most famous American writers who come from this movement is Ernest Hemingway. We all are familiar with Ernest Hemingway, and we all know actually what kind of literature he wrote, which he represented characters who were facing and suffering the confusion of a whole generation. Who are we and what defines us as a generation? And this was the reason they were called Lost Generation. Of course, these are just examples. If we speak about the literary movements in America in the modern period, there are many, so many. I'm just giving you here examples about them. And as I have told you, this is a very brief history of American literature. And of course, anyone who'd like to read more, you can follow these titles. And actually, there are a lot of resources and references in which you can find detailed descriptions of each period. I hope this was helpful and interesting at the same time. See you in next videos.